For thousands of years, as humans migrated into the continent of Westeros, war was an ever-present danger, with war chiefs, lords, princes, and kings struggling against each other, often for increased political authority or control of resources. In the face of so much conflict, the noble families of Westeros implemented a military and political hierarchy based on the feudal traditions of the ancient Andals to ensure an organized system for the recruitment of soldiers in the event of war. After the conquest of House Targaryen and the eventual unification of the Seven Kingdoms, this hierarchy adapted to include the king as a central authority in all matters, allowing him to assemble the armies of Westeros at a single command. Should the ruler deem it necessary to take his people to war, he may call upon his vassal lords, 8 leaders of great houses sworn to administer a large territory, the borders of which are often determined by historical precedent. These nobles are sworn to the king, charged with settling local disputes, keeping the peace, and collecting taxes. In the event of war, vassal lords must raise their own forces, as well as call upon the armies of their bannermen. Bannermen are regional lords, who have sworn oaths of fealty to the vassal lords of the larger territory. In the event of war, bannermen must raise their own forces as well as call upon the armies of any lesser lords sworn to their service. These lesser lords, or petty lords, are charged with the administration of a small area on behalf of their regional lord. In the event of war, they must organize any knights or soldiers under their command and raise local peasant forces if necessary. Despite the varying levels of responsibility among the noble classes, all these men share the rank of lord and earn their income off the lands they hold, then allocating a portion of that to raising and maintaining armies and naval fleets. While costly, the most prominent houses also employ large numbers of knights, lesser nobles who are considered among the greatest soldiers of Westeros. The title of knighthood is bestowed upon a warrior who proves himself before another knight, being granted the title Sir, which often brings a higher level of respect from both commoners and nobility. Highest among their ranks are landed knights, who have been rewarded for their service to a lord, and granted lands with peasants to work the field and a keep. Some landed knights can even rival and surpass the wealth of lesser lords, able to raise and maintain their own armies. However, the rank of knight makes them unable to administer justice, forced to call upon their local lords for settlement of a dispute. In the event of war, landed knights are sworn to raise their armies and follow their lord into battle. There are also household knights who have pledged themselves to a single master, and hedge knights, landless warriors with no permanent allegiance, often traveling to tournaments for coin, or else contracting with a lord and serving in their army for a time. Knights who earn a valiant reputation and follow the code of chivalry associated with their rank are often referred to as true knights, while those who turn to theft and raiding are known as robber knights. With this political and military hierarchy set in place, each of the 9 territories of the Seven Kingdoms are capable of raising armies. However, just how many soldiers they can raise and how quickly varies depending on the size of the territory, harshness of the environment, and density of the population. Starting in the south, there is Dorne, the last realm of Westeros to join the Seven Kingdoms, successfully resisting House Targaryen during the conquest and maintaining their independence until joining through a marriage alliance under King Daeron II. They are ruled by House Martell, who kept the titles Prince and Princess of Dorne in the traditions of their Rhoynar ancestors. According to King Daeron I, who invaded and briefly occupied the territory, in the war he called the Conquest of Dorne, the Dornish were able to raise 50,000 men in the conflict. Yet this number was likely exaggerated in order to make the Targaryen victories in the early part of the war seem more impressive. Although the Dornish nobles were largely defeated, the small folk refused to yield, continuing the war and eventually driving the royal forces out of the territory. The Martells of Dorne, who returned to power, never bothered to correct the number of 50,000, happy to be perceived as a larger threat. Dorne is, however, able to raise a large number of men, often compared in power to the north and the Vale, with a Dornish war chief known as the Vulture King having once raised a rebel army of 30,000 men. In the years before the Andal migration into Westeros, when First Men ruled the continent, stories say King Ferrys Fowler raised an army of 10,000 and marched them into the Reach, only to be turned back by King Garth Gardner VII. Many years later, after joining the Seven Kingdoms, House Martell of Dorne maintained strong ties to the royal House Targaryen, and so fought with the loyalist forces during Robert's Rebellion, with Prince Lewin Martell leading 10,000 soldiers to join Prince Rhaegar's host, totaling 40,000 in the Battle of the Trident. In 298 AC, following the death of King Robert Baratheon and the outbreak of the War of the Five Kings, Dorne chose to stay out of the initial conflict, carefully weighing their options and allowing their rival houses to exhaust their resources. Moving on, the fertile fields and lush valleys of the Reach are some of the most prosperous and wealthy areas of Westeros, believed to be capable of raising between 80 and 100,000 soldiers, and even maintaining a strong naval fleet of 200 ships in the Arbor and another smaller fleet near the Shield Islands. During the conquest of Westeros, House Gardener raised a large army alongside their allies in House Lannister of the Westerlands to resist Aegon the Conqueror. However, they were soundly defeated in the Field of Fire, where 4,000 men were burned alive, leading to their surrender and the fall of House Gardener, replaced as rulers of the Reach by House Tyrell, who swore fealty to the Targaryens. During Robert's Rebellion, the Reach were loyalists, and saw an army commanded by the Tyrell bannerman Randyll Tarly defeat Robert Baratheon at the Battle of Ashford before laying siege to Storm's End. When violence again erupted in Westeros during the War of the Five Kings, they initially sided with King Renly Baratheon until he was assassinated, then forming an alliance with King Joffrey and House Lannister, marrying a daughter of their house to the crown. With an abundant supply of silver and gold mines, the Westerlands developed into the richest territory of the Seven Kingdoms, ruled by House Lannister of Casterly Rock. Many believe the Westerlands capable of raising up to 50,000 soldiers. However, given their wealth, they can also increase their numbers through the hiring of sellswords. They are also known to maintain a naval fleet at Lannisport. While they initially resisted the Targaryen conquest, joining the Reach to raise 55,000 men, they were ultimately defeated and bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. During Robert's Rebellion, they remained neutral for most of the war, only joining the rebels when their victory became inevitable. To gain the favor of the future king, Tywin Lannister led 12,000 soldiers into King's Landing and sacked the city, with Tywin's son Jaime of the Kingsguard betraying his oath to kill the Targaryen king, while Tywin's men murdered Rhaegar's wife, Princess Elia, and their children. After the war, King Robert Baratheon married Tywin's daughter Cersei and united the realm under their rule. Years later, during the War of the Five Kings, the Lannisters defended King Robert's heir, Joffrey, eventually allying with the Tyrells of the Reach. Initially, Tywin gathered an army of 20,000, while Jaime commanded another of roughly 14 to 15,000, with Sir Stafford Lannister left to raise a third army. However, both Stafford and Jaime's forces were defeated by the Northmen following Robb Stark. Tywin then took his army south to defend King's Landing, choosing to deal with the Northerners in another way, by organizing the betrayal of the Boltons and Freys at the Red Wedding. Moving eastward, there are the Stormlands, once ruled by the mighty Storm Kings of House Durrandon until conquered by the Targaryens. Orys Baratheon, the possible half-brother of Aegon the Conqueror, then married the daughter of the defeated king, adopting their words and sigil to establish House Baratheon. The territory is believed to have the capability of raising 30,000 soldiers, many of whom joined the efforts of Lord Robert Baratheon when he rebelled against House Targaryen, defeating them and taking the Iron Throne. After the death of King Robert, the Stormlands were split, with most supporting Robert's youngest brother, Renly Baratheon, until he was assassinated, then switching over to Renly's elder brother Stannis, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. It is estimated that roughly 20,000 men joined Renly Baratheon, and about 15,000 later switched over to Stannis. With his army now numbering roughly 20,000, Stannis attacked King's Landing, but was defeated at the Battle of the Blackwater, retreating to Dragonstone. Although he knew it meant leaving his lands vulnerable, Stannis then took his army north to help the Night's Watch, leaving a garrison at Dragonstone and Storm's End. However, both were eventually lost, with the Lannisters and Tyrells taking Dragonstone, while a young man named Aegon Targaryen, claiming to be the son of Rhaegar, invaded with the Golden Company, capturing Storm's End and much of the Stormlands. After the War of Conquest, the crownlands were formed, reserved as the area directly administered by the king. For centuries, this region was governed by House Targaryen until their defeat in 283 AC, when House Baratheon added these lands to their holdings. It is believed the crownlands can raise 10 to 15,000 soldiers, while the gold cloaks garrisoned at King's Landing have been known to number between 2 and 6,000. The island of Dragonstone, which also falls under the crownlands, can then raise additional soldiers, with the Targaryens having once raised an army estimated to be between less than 1,600 to as high as 3,000. These forces, however, were gathered not only from Dragonstone, but from those allied to the Targaryens in Driftmark, Claw Isle, Sharp Point, and Stone Dance. During the reign of King Aenys and Maegor the Cruel, a rebellion led by the Faith of the Seven saw the rise of the Faith militants, gathering much support from the crownlands, leading to several confrontations, including the battle at the Great Fork, which saw 13,000 poor fellows, supported by hundreds of knights from the warriors' sons. Their forces were defeated, however, by the Targaryen king. During Robert's rebellion, the soldiers of the Crownlands, King's Landing, and Dragonstone fought for House Targaryen until they were defeated and their loyalty shifted to House Baratheon. During the War of the Five Kings, most of the Crownlands remained loyal to the idea of House Baratheon by siding with King Robert's heir, Joffrey, yet in truth, they became servants of House Lannister, who truly controlled the throne. Dragonstone, however, remained loyal to King Stannis Baratheon, who was lord of the island. Driftmark and Claw Isle, the traditional allies of Dragonstone, also sided with the elder Baratheon when the legitimacy of Robert's children came into question. In the mountainous realm of the Vale, House Arryn has held power for thousands of years, a prosperous territory protected by their natural fortifications, and are believed to be capable of raising up to 45,000 warriors. The Vale is also home to various independent factions of mountain clansmen, descended from the First Men who once ruled the territory and who fled into the mountains, choosing to live as outlaws, rather than kneel to the Andal conquerors. During Robert's rebellion, House Arryn of the Vale followed Robert Baratheon to victory, and after the war, Lord Jon Arryn was named Hand of the King. After the death of Jon Arryn, King Robert, and the outbreak of the War of the Five Kings, the Vale chose to remain neutral under Lady Lysa Arryn and her son Robert Arryn. In this way, they were kept strong, sparing their resources, while others weakened. However, the independent mountain clansmen did participate, with roughly 300 of their warriors hired to fight alongside Lannister forces. When Lady Lysa Arryn died, Peter Baelish was left as Lord Protector of the Vale, and was confronted by 6 powerful nobles of the territory who were able to raise 20,000 men on their own. Yet tensions eventually subsided, and Littlefinger was allowed to remain in his role as ruler of the Vale on behalf of Lord Robert Arryn, who was still a child. In the Riverlands, House Tully has ruled since Aegon's conquest, when House Hoare was defeated and the kingdom of isles and rivers broken apart. They are believed capable of raising 45,000 soldiers, and have often found themselves as a battleground for the various wars of the continent, given their central location connecting so many powerful realms. During Robert's rebellion, they allied with the rebels, establishing an alliance through marriage with the Vale of Arryn and the North. This alliance continued into the War of the Five Kings, which saw them support King Robb Stark until the betrayal at the Red Wedding. And while men like Brynden the Blackfish Tully continued to fight for the Stark-Tully cause, the Riverlands were devastated by the war, leaving the Frey Lannister alliance to rule most of the territory. Further west, there are the Iron Islands, where House Greyjoy has ruled since Aegon's conquest, continuing the traditions of their people by focusing on reaving, naval warfare, and the worship of the Drowned God. The Ironborn are estimated to be capable of raising 20,000 warriors, while the Iron Fleet consists of 100 ships, 3 times larger than longships, comparable in strength to the Royal and Red Wine fleets. In addition, the Lords of the Islands are capable of launching roughly 100 ships each. They remained neutral for most of Robert's rebellion, though they did join the rebels at the end, even attacking the Reach with their ships. However, years later, Balon Greyjoy rose up and proclaimed himself King of the Iron Islands in the Greyjoy Rebellion, yet they were soundly defeated by House Baratheon and the royal fleet. During the War of the Five Kings, Balon Greyjoy once again rebelled, this time declaring himself King of the Isles and the North, uniting his people behind an invasion of Stark lands. However, after some initial success, they found it difficult to keep the territories they captured, and so retreated to the Iron Islands, where they elected Euron Greyjoy as their king after the death of his brother Balon. Euron promised an alliance with the Dragon Queen Daenerys Targaryen and an invasion of the Seven Kingdoms, beginning with raids against the Reach. In King's Landing, they reported that Euron attacked the Shield Islands with 1,000 ships, though others believe it likely closer to half that number. After the Ironborn victory, Euron's brother Victarion was sent with the Iron Fleet to Slaver's Bay, where they were to present themselves to Daenerys. However, many of the ships are destroyed during the voyage, with Victarion capturing others to compensate, ending up with 61 ships as they sailed towards Meereen. In the north of Westeros, where the First Men held off the Andal invaders, House Stark ruled as kings of winter from their ancestral home of Winterfell for thousands of years. During the War of Conquest, King Torrhen Stark raised an army of 30,000, but decided to kneel before the Targaryen conquerors, rather than risk their destruction. The Starks were then allowed to remain as lords of the territory. It is believed they can raise about 45,000 soldiers, including thousands of strong northern cavalry, roughly equivalent to the Knights of the South, though less prestigious. Due to the size of their territory, harsh terrain, and spread out population, they are slow in gathering together their forces, but once assembled, the armies of the North are famed for their ferocity and strength. During the Dance of the Dragon Civil War, 2,000 Northmen, known as the Winter Wolves, went south in support of Queen Rhaenyra, while Lord Cregan Stark remained in the north, gathering a larger host for the war. In the end, Cregan marched south with a massive army, only to learn that King Aegon II had been killed, and Rhaenyra's son Aegon III was crowned king, ending the war before the Northmen could fight. During Robert's rebellion, the Starks supported the rebels, entering into a marriage alliance with House Tully, creating a friendship that would endure beyond the death of King Robert and into the War of the Five Kings, when the Riverlands declared for Robb Stark as King of the North and the Trident. Robb originally gathered 12,000 men at Winterfell, then adding to his numbers as he marched towards Moat Cailin, totaling roughly 19,500 warriors. Although some were left behind to protect the north, many followed Robb south, adding another 4,000 soldiers from House Frey, and more from others as they made their way through the Riverlands. And while Robb Stark proved an excellent commander, never losing a battle, he was betrayed and killed at the Red Wedding. The lordship of the north was then usurped by the Boltons, while the Riverlands were left for the Freys and Lannisters. However, many of the houses of the north were appalled by the betrayal of the Starks, and so the territory fractured, with some choosing to support Stannis Baratheon against the Bolton traitors. Among those supporting King Stannis are the mountain clansmen of the north, who were loyal to the Starks and can raise roughly 3,000 men for war. Further north, there is the Night's Watch, men who have taken oaths to guard the wall against any threat to the southern realms. They are sworn not to participate in the politics of the Seven Kingdoms, and over the years raised 19 castles, and at the time of the Targaryen conquest, had 10,000 men in their ranks. However, by the time of the War of the Five Kings, their numbers had dwindled to less than 1,000 men, manning only 3 castles. Beyond the wall, the Free Folk, also known as Wildlings, live independent of the Seven Kingdoms. Descended from the First Men, these people live in small clans, struggling to survive, and are treated as an invading force by the Night's Watch when they attempt to raid or migrate to warmer conditions. This has sometimes led them to unite under a king beyond the wall to battle the Night's Watch in hopes of crossing to the south. During the War of the Five Kings, in 299 AC, King Mance Rayder led an army estimated between 30 and 40,000. However, many of these people were women, children, and the elderly. And while they stood a good chance against the minor forces protecting the wall, Stannis Baratheon soon arrived with a proper southern army and defeated the Wildlings, taking Mance Rayder as a captive. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Sir Darren of House Ashford, Sir Rice of the Dreadfort, and Arhael the Silent Blade. If you'd like to help the channel with a monthly donation, click on the Patreon link, and please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to see more.